Great. Just a few more coming in from the waiting room here. We'll go ahead and get started. So once again, everybody, welcome to this webinar presented by the Ontario Association of School Districts International. This webinar is entitled Pathways to Post-Secondary and Beyond in Ontario, and is one of a series of webinars that OASDI is presenting over this next month. So we'll be hosting these webinars every Wednesday for the next 4 weeks, including this week. And these webinars are really designed to help international students in Ontario prepare for a future in the province. So if you want to learn more about our other webinars that are coming up this throughout this month, then please go on over to our website. It's OASDI, OASDI.ca. And then to specifically see our webinars, it's oasdi.ca/webinars. So the Ontario Association of School Districts International is a membership-driven organization that's led through the volunteer efforts of representatives from school districts across Ontario who welcome international students to the local schools and communities. So we've come together today again as an opportunity to introduce pathways for post-secondary studies in Ontario, specifically as it relates to immigration, and then beyond that, maybe permanent residence or some working career pathways in Ontario as well. And to bring us his expertise today, we have Marc-André Ranger. He is a immigration paralegal with over 20 years experience in the legal industry. He's assisted literally thousands of international students in properly securing the requirements they would need for coming into Canada. And we're really excited to have him share his expertise. He's also assisted students from transitioning from a temporary immigration status like a study permit or a work permit to a more permanent one like permanent residency. And I know that's going to be something that's going to be a part of what he discusses today too. So I'll turn it over to Marc-André. I know he has a presentation of between 20 and 30 minutes today, and there'll be some time for questions along the way too. So if you'd like to drop questions as we go in our chat, we'd be happy to. I'll be monitoring that and trying to collect those questions for Marc-André to respond at the end. But we will have some time for question and answer specifically at the end as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marc-André, and thank you very much again, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. I have been, as Matt mentioned, practicing as a paralegal for the past 21 years. I've worked primarily in law firm. I assisted indeed thousands of applicants, whether it's for a study permit or work permit or extending a visitor status or restoring one when you lose your status. So my understanding is most of you are in grade 12 and looking forward to the next step of your academic journey in Canada. So I prepared a short PowerPoint presentation with a couple of subjects that will be of an importance to you. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I apologize for the sound of my voice. This is due to the temperature outside that has an impact. So I will share my screen here with the short presentation. There you go. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone actually sees the presentation. All right. Okay, so basically you're going to be soon done with high school, which is fantastic. This is a great moment in your life. But now what's happening? This is where the big decisions are coming about the kind of career you're looking forward to do. And I've been there in the past. Matt has been there in the past. I kind of chose law because my neighbor was a lawyer and he had shared his passion for the subject. And so that's how I actually ended up studying as a paralegal and eventually found my first job in immigration and continue on that path for the past 21 years. And I was able to have a really great career that brought me to travel around the world, and that's because of education. So I'm a firm believer of the importance to continue on with your study journey. Now, there's a couple of things that we're going to want to look at to make sure that over the course of the next few years, you don't do any sorts of mistake in immigration that would end up costing you, for example, your postgraduate work permit. So, as you know, the path will most likely be either community college for some of you or a university program. In both cases, the concept is the same, which means that you're going to have to get a new study permit. The study permit that you currently have to attend grade 12 does not apply to post-secondary, so you will need to change that. There are two ways that you can do that. You can either get enrolled with a school and basically apply from within Canada while you're here, and basically ask for a new study permit for the new school starting in September, or you can apply from abroad for a new study permit, in which case, if you're accepted, you're going to get a letter of approval, and then when you are ready to get your new study permit, then you can come back to Canada and just get it. So, of course, if you're applying from abroad, then it's probably going to happen when you actually leave the country. But the easiest path would probably be for most of you to apply while you're here and just seek an extension. Now, to apply for your study permit, you're going to have to be accepted by a designated learning institution. And that might be a concept that some of you are not familiar with, and I left a link there, so I don't know at the end if, Matt, you're going to be sharing that with everyone. All secondary schools are designated learning institutions, so you never really had to ask yourself if the school you're going to be attending is a DLI. But at post-secondary level, you will have to ask yourself, because not every school in Canada is authorized to admit international students. So you cannot get a study permit if you are enrolled with a school that is not a designated learning institution. So the link here at the bottom will give you the list of all designated learning institutions. Of course, the most, most community colleges in Ontario, public schools, universities, most of them are designated learning institution, where you might have some of them that are not designated learning institution, might be on the career college side. Sometimes these private schools are not designated learning institutions. So if you were to seek admission with them, you would have a problem in trying to get the study permit. Now, another pretty cool venue here is, unlike at high school, where in most cases you get a one-year study permit, except from grade 9 and on, when you get to post-secondary level, you're going to get a study permit for the whole duration of your program. Now, if you have a condition of enrollment that you need to fulfill before being officially admitted to the program, then you're only going to get normally a study permit to basically clear that condition, and then apply for a new study permit once you've actually cleared that condition and you are enrolled into the program. Now, that's not a condition where you have to do one preliminary course. It's more about, for instance, if you don't have the language requirements, then maybe you're going to have to take some English courses before you're admitted into the program. Then in that case, the government would give you a study permit for that part, because you're not officially yet admitted into the program. Now, one thing for sure that a lot of you will be excited about is the right to work while you're studying. In grade 12, a lot of you are now adults, or at least you've reached the age of 18. So In Quebec, Quebec only stop at grade 11, so most people are not yet adult. In Ontario, with the grade 12, most of you are at the age where you would like to work, and because you're still in high school, you're not authorized to work outside the school. Now, with the post-secondary level, you're going to be able to. So there's two elements you're going to have to look at, is whether the job is on the campus or whether the job is outside the campus. Now, if you take a tour of McGill University or University of Toronto, you're going to see how big these institutions are. And sometimes you have private businesses that are within the premises of the campus. It could be a fast food restaurant. It could be just a business selling books to students. If you are working on campus, you can work as many hours as you want. If you are working outside the campus, you're going to be limited to 20 hours a week. This is what I highlighted here. Now, in both cases, whether you want to work on campus or you want to work outside the campus, to be able to work, you're going to need a SIN number, a social insurance number. That social insurance number will be delivered when you get your new study permit. Right now, normally your high school study permit does not allow you to work. There's generally a condition that states you can't, so you cannot get the SIN number. The post-secondary work permit will generally have a clause that allows you to work, and so that way you can bring your study permit to Service Canada, show them the study permit, and then they will issue a social insurance number that starts with 9, which identifies you as a foreign worker. If one of these days you become a permanent resident, then your social number would change to a permanent one. So your social security number would be valid for the same duration of your study permit. So using that and the study permit, you can go on and start looking for a job. Now, you have a couple of criteria that you're going to need to respect to make sure that you don't infringe on your status. And that is quite important, because sometimes in a younger age, we don't necessarily think long-term, but it can definitely have an impact on your status in Canada if you were to infringe your status. So to be able to work on campus or off campus, you need to be a full-time student. So pay close attention to the concept of full-time, because if you were to become a part-time, you drop a class, and let's say you have 4 classes, you drop one because you don't like it, you become a part-time, you have to stop working. You need to be enrolled, of course, at the designated learning institution. That's pretty simple. You won't have a study permit if you're not enrolled at this designated learning institution. You have to be enrolled in a program that is at least 6 months long, and that leads to a degree, a diploma, or a certificate. So if you were to attend a program that is 4 months, or if you were to take a program as a just a free student, not really enroll into a program, then that would not allow you to work. The other element, you need to have started working. So this means forget about this summer, unfortunately. If you're admitted to University of Toronto, it starts at the end of August. You finish school, say July 1st. You can't start working until you've actually started studying at the post-secondary level. So that is an important factor to look at. And I highlight this because you're going to notice most employers don't really have any clue of these rules. So if you show up there with a study permit that says I can work, and the employer might be willing to take you on board, but he doesn't realize that they actually can't. Same thing with the full-time or part-time. Ultimately, the employer cannot or will not ask you every week for a proof that you are studying on a full-time basis. It's going to be for you, if you decide to go study on a part-time basis, to actually inform the employer that you're not able to continue working. Some people will think, well, nobody's going to know, so I'm going to continue working. That's not the reality, because your social insurance number This is where all your payroll are registered for your taxes. This is where the employer, this is the number the employer is going to use to give you a T4 for your tax return. They're going to know, immigration, that you've actually continued working, and that could definitely put you in some hot water. So you're not authorized to leave your studies or switch school. I mean, you are authorized, but if you do so, you can't continue working. So let's say after 2 months, you don't like the program in which you're enrolled and you decide to drop, and you get admitted for January into another program. In between, you're not going to be able to continue working. So that's important, because if you are relying on your job to pay the bills, you might want to continue on with that program, even if you're not going to continue the next semester, to avoid that you have to stop working. As I mentioned here, you can only return to work once you're back to study. So, and again, as I mentioned, the employer is not going to know, because most employers are not going to be asking for evidence of that. So it's basically on your shoulder to make sure that you're going to be respecting the terms of your stay. Now, this is the good part, is during summer breaks or during the winter, you can actually work full time. So you can work 20 hours a week while you're in school, but between semesters, so most often in university, you're going to be done around April, end of April, early May, and then you're going to start back at the end of August, beginning of September. Well, during that period, you're actually entitled to work on a full-time basis for as many hours as you want. So that is a great, great, great opportunity for anyone to actually gain some Canadian work experience, or to actually, put money aside for the next semester. But there are conditions: is you need to have been a full-time student during the previous semester, and you need to be enrolled as a full-time student during the next semester. And again, some employers, they are not aware of that. They're not going to ask for a proof that you are enrolled for next semester. It is more for you to make sure that you do respect those two rules. So if you were a part-time student before and will be a full-time student in the next semester, you can't take advantage of that. So the golden rule is be a full-time student, stay a full-time student. And we're going to see also later on that if you were to decide to be a part-time student, it would also impact your ability to secure a postgraduate work permit, which I'm sure after 2-3 years of hard studies, you're going to want to have. The other thing is, you can't work during the break that comes before you start your first semester. So this means this summer, that's why I was mentioning, you're not going to be able to work, because you will finish grade 12, which doesn't allow you to work. You're only going to be entitled to start working when you are at the post-secondary level, and that will only start in September unless you're admitted into a summer program. So you want to make sure also that your program of study is eligible for a postgraduate work permit. And I cannot insist enough on that one, because you could be enrolled into a designated learning institution, but the program in which you're enrolled is not eligible for the postgraduate work permit. Again, in most public schools, that is not an issue, but in some private schools, that can definitely be an issue. And I've seen, unfortunately, some students investing $15,000 or $20,000 into a career college program and basically completing their program, only to find out at the end that they've wasted their time as far as the postgraduate work permit, because the program is not approved by the government for a postgraduate work permit. Every school, they know whether their program is admitted. If you're going to the University of Toronto, if you're going to St. Lawrence College and you're taking an associate degree or a bachelor's degree, you don't really have to worry about that. But if you're going on the private sector, you should definitely ask that question right from the beginning to make sure that you're not going to have an unpleasant surprise at the end. Now, what's a postgraduate work permit? Some may ask. Well, as the terminology says it right, it's a work permit after you actually graduate from your program of study. And that's actually a great reward for the hard work you're going to put in, because basically, if you do, for example, a 3 years bachelor degree, you're going to be eligible for a 3 years postgraduate work permit. So we're talking about a 6-year status that is pretty much guaranteed in Canada, as long as you study and on a full-time basis, and you actually pass your courses and finish off your program. So basically, the postgraduate work permit is an open work permit. I'm assuming most of you are not really aware of the distinction, but in Canada, you have 2 types of work permit. You have work permit that are called restricted, meaning that it's designed to work for one specific employer only in one specific jobs, and you have open work permit. So if you're on an employer restricted work permit and you lose your job or you want to quit, then you are not going to be able to go and work for someone else until you get a new work permit. The open work permit is a much better option because you can pretty much do whatever you want. You could finish up school and say, I want to start my own business. You could finish up school and find a job in any province, in any job that you want. If you lose your job because you are able to move on with another job, then you can also apply for EI, unemployment benefits, which an employer restricted work permit in most cases does not allow. So it's a great privilege. And basically, to be eligible, you need to have completed a program that is at least 8 months and up to a maximum of 3 years. So if you were to, for example, do a university certificate, or if you were to do a 1-year community college certificate and decide to move on to a second certificate, you could combine these 2 certificates and basically apply for a postgraduate work permit. And I'm saying this because that is a strategy you need to think about, because you can only apply for 1 postgraduate work permit in your lifetime. So if you decide to do, for example, a university certificate or a minor, and that is, say, 2 semesters, and you end up with your certificate and you decide to apply for your postgraduate work permit because you're excited to go on the labor market, then you're going to get an 8 months work permit. But then let's say you decide to continue on after and you say, you know what, I'll do my bachelor degree. Then you would have been entitled to a 3 years work permit, but now you can't apply because you already used your chip. You already applied for the postgraduate work permit once. Any program that is at least 2 years or more will give you a 3 years postgraduate work permit. So if you were to go to a community college, you might want to consider a 2 years program instead of a 1 year, because you will have a greater benefit after being the postgraduate work permit valid for 3 years. The alternative is you can do a 1 year certificate and then basically do another one right after, and then the government will still consider you did a 2 years program, even if it was 1 year, and then you can apply for the postgraduate work permit. Of course, these are the rules in place as we speak. You never know if the government is not going to change those rules over the next few years, but that's what it is for the moment. Now, the other thing is the postgraduate work permit will allow you to basically gain very important Canadian work experience. And as I will discuss a little bit further after, if you want to become a permanent resident, the experience, the work experience you're going to gain as a student does not count towards applying for permanent residency. The government will only count the experience you're going to gain after you graduated, and that work experience on your open work permit may very well be the key for you to become a permanent resident if that's something you're interested about. Now, still on the postgraduate work permit, you're going to have to respect some of the rules, and I cannot tell you how many times I had to announce the bad news to a student that they're not eligible for postgraduate work permit because they decided to be a part-time student during one semester. Unless you have a really good excuse, or unless the school specifically requested you go on a part-time, because sometimes you have academic difficulties and the school will ask that you take a bit less courses. Normally, for the majority, you need to be a full-time student in every semester except the last one. And the reason is sometimes in university or community college, you get credits for the courses you're going to follow. And sometimes you take 4 courses, sometimes you take 5, sometimes you take 6. Sometimes at the end of the 3 years program, you have 1 or 2 courses left to do to graduate. If it's the last semester, then the government will accept. But other than that, normally, if you've decided to become a part-time student, you will lose that benefit of the postgraduate work permit. And that's something many students are not aware, and they make a decision in good faith to take 3 classes or 2 classes instead of being full-time. And then they end up with a very bad surprise at the end of their studies. The government, as I mentioned, may accept certain situation if there's a strike at the university, or if you fall very ill and you can't do it, or there's a couple of life events like that that can justify. But other than that, they're not very flexible. The other thing is you have to apply within a maximum of 180 days from the completion of your program. The completion of your program is not the date that you actually graduate and you have your party. It's the actual day that you get your final mark in your report card or transcripts that says you completed the program. That's where the clock starts ticking. And that's important because, for example, during COVID, a lot of graduation ceremony were postponed. It has nothing to do with when you actually get your diploma or when you have your graduation ceremony. It has to do with the moment you actually completed the program. It used to be 90 days. The government has extended that to 180 days to give more flexibility. If you go beyond the 180 days, then it's over. You lost the opportunity to apply for the postgraduate work permit. If you also, one thing I forgot to mention that I think is worth mentioning, if you change school or drop out, the government will give you 150 days maximum to start school again. So, and that's important because unlike high school, where we go to school every day for 9 to 10 months, at post-secondary level, there could be a great gap if you drop in September and decide not to go into school in January because you want to start in May or September. You would fall beyond the 150 days. Your study permit would be automatically canceled, but no one's going to tell you. You're still, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you may get a 3 years study permit because your program is 3 years. If you are not in school for 150 days, then the government will consider your study permit as invalid. So you can't go back to school even if it says that it's valid for 3 years. Now, and the final and foremost, some of you may want to stay here after your studies. Right now, students that are in grade 12 usually don't qualify. I'd say 99.9% don't qualify for permanent residency. The reason is because you're still young and don't have work experience, professional work experience. The government has created various programs to help the students stay in Canada. That is their goal. If you have a Canadian degree, it will most likely be much easier to integrate the Canadian labor force. So they want to keep you. So Ontario has its own program called the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program. There's also a program that you may have heard before. It's called Express Entry. Express Entry basically is a point-based system, but usually after 1 year of professional experience in Canada, you're able to qualify under Express Entry. And the reason why they call it Express Entry, it's because it's express. It takes about 6 months only to become a permanent resident. So so basically you have a path in front of you that is opening up as of now, that you can actually go to post-secondary for 2 or 3 years. Then you can actually get a postgraduate work permit, start gaining that valuable Canadian work experience that actually counts towards becoming a permanent resident. And then finally, you can apply for your permanent residency while you're in Canada under your postgraduate work permit. And the chances are you're actually going to become a permanent resident before your postgraduate work permit expires. And then, of course, with permanent residency comes greater benefits. For example, if you do a bachelor degree and now you become a permanent resident, you want to go to the master's degree, the tuition fees are not going to be the same at all, because now you're going to be paying Canadian tuition fees. You can actually work in any jobs you want. You can live anywhere in Canada. You can eventually become a citizen. So it comes with great advantages. But everything that we've discussed starts with one thing: is to be enrolled with a designated learning institution, to actually study on a full-time basis, to be successful in your academic journey so that you get your degree, and then, of course, postgraduate work permit and then permanent residency. So I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. I specifically wanted to highlight key elements of your journey as a student in Canada so that you don't do a mistake without knowing, because unfortunately in Canadian laws, not being ignorant of an immigration policy or a law is not an excuse that you're going to be able to use to justify the infringement. So that's why it's important to start on the right foot. I've been working on developing a platform called ImmiSite. This is a logo here, so it's immisite.com. Basically, I'm trying to use technology, and you guys are probably all tech savvy. I'm trying to use technology to make it as simple as possible so that you guys can apply on your own for your study permit, your postgraduate work permit. If you have an internship that is part of your program, sometimes in community colleges or university, you might have to do a 2, 3, 4 months internship that forms part of the program. You're going to need a work permit that is separate. I can help you understanding all of these. If you're coming from a visa required country and you're applying for your new study permit from within Canada, you're not going to get a new visitor visa. You're going to have to apply separately for that once you get your new study permit. I can also guide you. I mean, the website of Immigration Canada has 16,000 pages, 8,000 in French, 8,000 in English. Pretty much everything you need to know is there. The only thing is there's not many courses in university that you have a book of 16,000 or 8,000 pages. So it can be hard to figure out where the information is. And that's what ImmiSite is about. It's about helping you finding your way in through the website of Immigration Canada. Matt, I see that concludes the element I wanted to discuss with you. I see we have a couple of chat, Matt. So
yeah, I've been kind of documenting questions as we go. If you don't mind, maybe I could read them off to you.
Yeah, sure.
So Takako asked, just to clarify about if a student was to achieve one certificate for a year and then do another certificate program for a year, does that then grant them the eligibility for post-secondary work permit for 2 years?
That's right. Actually, it would grant you the right for 3 years.
For 3 years.
Because, yes, because any program that is 2 years in duration is considered for a 3 years work permit. So if you do a 2 years associate degree, or if you do 2 1-year certificate back to back, you're going to be eligible to apply for a 3 years postgraduate work permit. Where it becomes a bit more tricky is when you go to a private career college, for example, and they have an 18 months program or 16 months program, then you're only going to get a 16 months work permit or 18 months work permit.
Right.
I mean, technically a 2 years associate degree, because it's 4 semester, would be almost like a 16 months, but the government considers those as 2 years.
Great. Okay. I think that's clear. And Takako, if you want to clarify, just drop a note in the chat. And the next question came from Eve. She was asking just to clarify that a 4-year bachelor's degree would generally still result in a 3-year postgraduate work permit as well. Which
That's right. The maximum work permit duration is 3 years. So even if you do a 4 years bachelor degree, you're going to have a 3 years work permit.
Great. Okay. Now Christina's asked, her father has a work permit and is here in Canada. So she's asking about applying for university or college in Ontario, and if she'd be eligible. I think I can answer that. I think, of course, she'd be eligible. But in terms of applying as a domestic student, I think she would be applying as an international student. And therefore,
you're right. You would be, there's 2 things. Is because right now you can have a study permit because you're in high school and basically your father has a work permit. So it grants you the right to get a study permit and study at any school you want. Now, because you're entering the adult world, welcome aboard, welcome to the club. You're no longer going to be a dependent on your father. You're going to need to get your own study permit. This means that you're going to need to be accepted by a Canadian school. Normally, students that are at elementary or secondary level, if the parent has a work permit, they get a study permit and then they can go study at any school they want. They don't need the formal admission letter. Now that you're entering post-secondary, you're going to have to get yourself an enrollment letter with a designated learning institution, and you're going to need to apply for your own study permit. And unfortunately, you're going to have to continue paying international tuition fees until you become a permanent resident.
Great. Okay. Sophia asked, if she goes back to Italy for the last year of school, could she still apply for the permit afterwards? So I'm not sure if she's talking about the postgraduate work permit. Of course, that would require graduation and finishing the last year of school at a post-secondary here in Canada, correct?
That's right. If you, well, there's 2 elements. Bear in mind, we have to apply within 180 days of graduation, and you need to actually graduate from a Canadian school. This means that at least 51% of the course curriculum is a Canadian course curriculum. And basically, the degree needs to be issued by a Canadian institution for you to become eligible for a postgraduate work permit. So if you study in France and you come for a 1-year exchange, you're not going to be eligible for a postgraduate work permit.
Okay, great.
Now, if the question refers though to applying for a study permit, you can go back to Italy and apply for your study permit with the letter of enrollment from the designated learning institution. Now, there's no point to apply a year ahead of time. Generally, people will apply, 6 to 8 months ahead of time, sometimes even 3 or 4 months. But there's no need to apply so much ahead of time either.
Okay, great. So Carlos asks, what types of programs in college can you take for a job in demand in Canada? And I guess I'll just answer that to suggest that you talk to the guidance counselor at your school, Carlos, because they're helping students all the time with that very question. That's an important question, and it can vary based on the community that you're looking at in Ontario too, for what types of jobs are in demand. But your guidance counselor at your school can definitely help with that a little more. to also see what would align with not only jobs in demand, but with your skills too.
And also what what you like to do in life, because Matt and I can attest that you're going to have to wake up 5 days a week and go to work. So regardless of the money, you want to do something you're going to like, because life can be quite long otherwise.
Yeah, great point. So Eve asked if it's fairly straightforward for students to apply to post-secondary work permits themselves, or if one needs a lawyer to do that.
No, you definitely don't need a lawyer to do that. I mean, you can retain one if you feel that you need more assistance. You can come to ImmiSite. We'll guide you for free. What we offer at ImmiSite is half an hour legal consultation. We have a lawyer with us. Generally, what we do is we help you get all your documents and all your application prepared for free, and then you can discuss and review your final package. But it is a pretty straightforward process. I'd say in immigration, applying for a study permit is probably one of the easiest paths if you compare to work permits, for example. And as I mentioned during the presentation, you have 16,000 pages of information there. I'll guide you finding those. The process is done electronically on a portal that is called MyCIC. It's very intuitive. So it's quite easy, but your journey starts with a letter of enrollment from the school. So there's no point until you are officially admitted into a school. There's no point to start any process with the study permit.
So Seda was asking for your contact information, and I'm assuming that'll be okay for us to share afterwards, Marc.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very simple. It's info@immisite.com. Or you can come on the ImmiSite. There's a chat bot there that will ask you a few questions so that I know what you're looking for. And then you can actually ask at the end of the chat bot, which only asks 3 or 4 questions just to make sure that I have a portrait. You can actually ask your question, and I always respond within 1 day. And I have an internal database where I can share with the students so that you can provide me with a bit more information about yourself so that I can further assist you. Because of course, when you're going to be entering into the post-secondary level, you're no longer under the umbrella of your parents. The government wants to know if you've been arrested, if you've been in trouble, if you have, medical issues and stuff like that. One big piece of advice, and I'm sure it's not the intention of anyone, but if you were to be arrested for a criminal offense, it could be shoplifting or drinking and driving. That would have a significant and considerable impact. You could be basically forced to leave Canada. So you want to make sure that these college parties you're going to be in, that you're there for fun and that you respect the law, because I've seen many students that unfortunately were arrested. Sometimes you think it's a minor offense, but because you are a non-resident, your status is not very protected here if you do a criminal offense.
It's important to consider, for sure, to remember. So Twessa asked about avoiding subsection 216 bracket 1, which I believe relates to the confidence that IRCC would have that you would leave Canada after studies.
Yeah, this is, you guys are already in Canada, so the question is it's a lesser of importance than if you apply from abroad. Of course, the way the Immigration Act and the regulations is structured, it's a reverse burden, meaning that the person seeking a status in Canada has to satisfy the visa officer that they are what they call bona fide, meaning legitimate temporary resident. This means that if the government is not convinced that you're going to respect the terms of your temporary stay, that you could seek for asylum or refugee status, then they might refuse you. That assessment has already been made because you guys are all in Canada, from my understanding. So it's not something that is likely to cause an issue. But for those who are abroad and are looking at studying in Canada at post-secondary level, sometimes the most common reason for refusing is the fact that you haven't convinced the visa officer you will return home at the end of the temporary stay. And that, unfortunately, is a very subjective assessment. There are ways to address some of the concerns that the government may have, but that is a case by case. We need to look into the specifics of each and every one case. But again, I would not lose sleep over that issue since you guys are already here. I would be surprised the government says, hey, we allowed you in and we allowed you to study and you actually did study and you respected the terms, but now we're no longer convinced. It's kind of unlikely.
Right. Okay, but it does sound like if this student asking maybe studying on abroad online and considering coming later, it sounds like it would be a very unique case by case to really try to prove that because of the subjective nature. So that might
normally, of course, because you are young, you don't have a patrimony or children. Often you're single, so generally that assessment is more for older applicants because there's a lot of people that are trying to do indirectly what they can't do directly, and that is to immigrate to Canada. So they figure, you know what, I have an MBA, but yeah, I'm going to do an associate degree in the community college just to gain permanent residence. That would be a red flag for the government. If you are married with 2 kids and you want to come and study in Canada, it could be a red flag. The government might wonder why all of a sudden you have this urge to come and study here. If you want to do a program of study that is designed specifically for Canadians, for example, my program as a paralegal, Quebec has a different legal system because it's a French province. They have the French civil law. So why would you want to do a program that is limited exclusively to Quebec when you're supposed to go back home? So these could be red flags. But again, in your case, it's less likely, but it is a possibility if you choose a program that is really, really exclusively Canadian oriented.
Right. Okay. Great. So next question. Just catching up to which is express entry only for degrees within Ontario?
No. Express entry is for degrees anywhere in Canada. The only distinction with express entry is Quebec, the province of Quebec, where I was born, has its own immigration system, its own selection right. So express entry is not designed for people who are seeking to live in Quebec. But other than that, and even then, if you graduated from McGill, it's still good. It's really just about where do you intend to reside when you're going to be a permanent resident. So you can still come and study at post-secondary in Quebec. That is absolutely not a problem. You can do your degree in any provinces you want. The only difference is each provinces have their own provincial nominee program. So sometimes, for instance, if you study in the Maritimes, because they have a bit of a harder time attracting a permanent resident, then you might have an easier path under their provincial nominee program. But express entry, basically, you can study anywhere and and gain your work experience anywhere, including Quebec.
Great. Okay. The next question we had was Luca asked about if he was able to get a postgraduate work permit if he skipped a year and came back to Canada a year after his graduation. I think you mentioned there's a 180-day requirement.
That's right. So if you complete your program and leave for a year, you're not going to be eligible. So what you normally would do is you apply for your postgraduate, and you can go back home if you want. Your postgraduate, say you completed a bachelor degree, then of course you have a 3 years work permit. You don't need to be 3 years in Canada if you don't want to. You can go back for a year and just come back and finish off your 2 years. It's just that you can't get an extension of your postgraduate work permit. So it's a personal decision, but definitely if you go beyond the 180 days of graduation, it's over.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like if you did want to take a year off, you'd almost want to time it to apply on the 179th day.
You would want to do that because that way, you would basically gain, you would not lose that 6 months threshold. And you can actually apply for your postgraduate work permit from abroad as well. You don't have to be in Canada. So, so that's the other element. You could decide to leave and just apply from abroad, or you can apply from here, get it, and leave.
Right, great. A question from Chloe: the deadline for applying for all universities, and for that you'll have to go to each university and each program website, and they'll have unique application deadlines, but there'll also be some common deadlines through the Ontario college and university application services. So
Yeah.
talk to your guidance counselor at the student services office at your school about that too. Taeyeon asked about a student loan for university. Said something about OSSD do not support international students. I think probably what you're talking about, Taeyeon, is the Ontario Student Assistance Program, or OSAP, which offers loans, government-sponsored student loans for Ontario students. I believe my understanding is that it is exclusive for Ontario residents. So there would be no student loan available through that program, but I know a number of students have secured, bank loans or other private loans for student loans for university too.
Yeah, one thing you have to look at is if you get a scholarship or a bursary, I'm pretty sure that Ontario OSAP does not support foreign work students, but there are some programs. Sometimes they have a condition that you have to go back to your country. So that you have to be careful, because if you get a scholarship from your own country, for example, then sometimes it comes with a condition that upon graduation you have to go back. Then you're not eligible for a postgraduate work permit.
Right. Okay.
But there's not many, quite frankly, there's not many options of scholarship and bursaries. And when they are, there's a lot of people applying for those.
They're very competitive for sure. So the next, who had asked this? So Jarrett was asking that he mentioned that it has to be a year after working to gain eligibility to apply for permanent residency. And he was asking then, does it mean he can work during going to post-secondary school and then apply for residency at the same time? So
well, normally no. I mean, the work experience you're going to gain as a student will not count toward express entry, okay? Because basically it's kind of a privilege the government gives, but they are only going to count the experience you acquire after you graduated. So depending on the student, if you already have a degree from abroad and you have some work experience, then maybe you don't need to wait that year, because under express entry, at least for you guys, there's pretty much two streams of interest. There's one called the federal skilled worker, which is also a point-based system, but you don't need 1 year of Canadian experience. It's just that you got to make sure you have enough points to be invited. Or you have the Canadian experience class, which is generally the path that foreign students are going to be applying under. That requires 1 year of skilled experience in Canada. Without going into too much details, if you do 1 year as a cashier in a restaurant or a waiter, that's not going to work. It needs to be a skilled experience that it doesn't have to be related to your studies, but it has to be what they call the National Occupation Classification. So the National Occupation Classification is the list of all the jobs that exist in Canada, and they're basically classified with letters. So you have the letter O, which generally are senior management, then letter A are usually university required occupation, then level B, community college, technical, and then C and D are low skills jobs. So if you have 1 year of C and D, you're not going to qualify. Generally, if you have a post-secondary degree, then normally you're going to have a skill B or A. You need 1 year of that to actually qualify under the Canadian experience class, which again is most likely going to be the path for you guys.
okay, the next question was from Eve. Yeah, just asking about the application process, the process for acceptance at Canadian universities being similar to those for American universities, including, you know, a lengthy application, teacher recommendations, standardized test scores, multiple essays. And I think I can answer that one. I think I mean, it is a timely process, and it is pretty comprehensive anytime submitting applications at the post-secondary level, but it's a little less intense than I think some of our neighbors to the south of the post-secondary institution. So it's not as common to have you know, a letter of intention or an essay required. Some programs will require that, but not all. And there are no standardized test scores required for admission either. So each program will have unique kind of application requirements, but from what I understand, it's not quite as onerous at Canadian post-secondary institutions versus those American universities typically require. Taeyeon asked if they're to go to their own country after getting the permanent residency, will it expire? And because they're also considering wanting to work at home for a few years after graduation too.
So you would want to, so after graduation, you would want to go back home for a couple of years?
Or maybe after, you know, working through postgraduate work permit to achieve permanent residency. I think it's a question about, can you leave during that permanent residency?
Oh, you can definitely leave during that permanent residency. And even as a permanent resident, it offers great flexibility because you are only, to maintain your residency, you only have to live 2 years every 5-year period. So this means you can technically be 3 years outside Canada as a permanent resident and still maintain. The other thing is if you are working abroad, but for a Canadian company, so a Canadian company asks you to go work abroad, the time you're going to spend abroad can still be counted as time in Canada. And while you're applying for PR, you can definitely go back home. You're not forced to stay here at all.
Okay, great. Sarah asked, she's her current study permit application. So I'm assuming Sarah is maybe studying abroad with an OASDI school. It isn't yet here. So she's still waiting 18 months in processing for a study permit application, and IRCC hasn't given any useful feedback regarding the application.
Well, 18 months processing delays for a study permit is not something that is normal. So, you know, one area that if your application is still under processing, perhaps in Canada, we have the Access to Information Act, in which we can apply and get a copy of the notes of the visa officer to see what's going on, because it's not normal that you have to wait 18 months for a study permit. Normally, we're only looking at, you know, a couple of weeks.
Great, okay. Jessica is asking a 1 year, her cousin's looking at a 1 year PSW course and then express entry into Canada.
That would be, you know, first you need to check, because a lot of private schools are offering PSW and they're not designated learning institution. Then also, if they are a designated learning institution, you're going to have to make sure that the program, the PSW, allows you to be eligible for postgrad. Now, if you take a 1 year program, then you're assuming that you're going to have a job the very next day you graduate. Then that's fine. You can reach the 1 year threshold to qualify under express entry. But generally, we prefer to have a little bit of more flexibility. So maybe like a 13, 14 months program, where at least, you know, you can have a 1 month or 2 months buffer, because, you know, it could also be that you're losing your job and, you know, there's a delay between finding another one, and then you don't have that 1 year. So it might be a little bit tight, but it is an option. Yes.
Okay, great. So immigration process, what is the immigration process? Eve is asking, what is the immigration process if a student gets a bachelor degree, then immediately goes on to apply to it or attend a master's degree? Would that just be an extension of the study permit?
Yeah, you're going to have to extend the study permit for the master degree program. And then you might want to hold on to applying for your postgrad, until you actually completed your master's degree. Or if you want to work on a full-time basis while you're actually doing your master's degree, then you can apply for your postgraduate work permit and then also apply for a study permit for the master's degree.
Right. Okay. So the next question was, Christine had heard something about a program for children of work permit holders and some information on that. I don't know, at York University specifically. I'm not sure that there's anything specific there, anything beyond what we talked about as, I'm
not aware of anything specific to a school. For sure, if your parents are on a work permit, if one of the parents is on a work permit, you can basically get a study permit, as I mentioned before, to study in any school, but that is only for elementary and high school. At post-secondary level, you have to basically do your own things.
Okay. A question here from Julia asking, saying she's a Canadian citizen, but not a resident currently. Would she need to apply for a study or work permit to study or work here?
If you are a Canadian citizen, you don't need. Same thing if you're a permanent resident, you don't need a study permit. The study permit is for those who are not a permanent resident or citizens of Canada.
Okay.
So if you are, for example, if you're a Canadian citizen and you live in Italy and you want to come back, you don't need a study permit. The only thing is you're going to have to look at the tuition fees, because I believe you have to live here for a certain period of time, to be eligible for tuition fees of Canadians. So that would be something to look at with the university.
Okay, great. The next question, I had a question here from Olivia that on some university applications, she's not sure whether to choose study permit status or visitor status, because currently she has just a visa, and the study permit will be delivered when she enters Canada at the airport.
Yeah, so right now you have what's called a letter of introduction, which is basically saying you're accepted for your study permit, but you don't have your study permit. The study permit will be issued when you go to the border, either flagpole or entering Canada. So right now, if you are currently in Canada, you're here as a visitor. And then basically, if you want a flagpole and go get your study permit, then that's a potential. I mean, I would have to look at your situation more closely. But right now, if you don't have a study permit, you're here as a visitor.
Great. So I think that we had one other question, or just a comment that it was noted here, because there were some questions about applying to university and some of the processes related to that, and that can really, we'll address some of that at our next webinar, which is next Wednesday, again at 4 p.m. And again, you can register for that by going to oasdi.ca, oasdi.ca/webinar. Sorry, I just got another question here from Olivia about it being visitor status. So she would click then on the when she's applying to university, visitor status versus study permit status.
Well, until you have your study permit, you're a visitor. So, so it depends when you're going to be applying and when you decide to go get your study permit. But if you apply right now, if you're asking me what's your status right now, well, you don't have a study permit yet. You have an approval, but you don't have the study permit, so you are a visitor.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Great. And then Twess asked again, just reiterating that it seems like he had been refused, probably subject to, and was questioning about subsection 216, bracket 1. So I think
perhaps you should contact me by email and we can look into it. I mean, the reason for refusal, nothing precludes you from reapplying unless there's a false declaration. So, and believe me that the refusal rate is high. So you can't, you don't take it personal. Sometimes Immigration Canada now also uses artificial intelligence. So sometimes it's not even a human that actually looked at it. So, and taking a case to court for a refusal is extremely costly. So it's usually not the path that people recommend. Generally, we look more at reapplying. And as I mentioned before, under the Access to Information Act, a Canadian citizen or someone in Canada can actually I can actually apply if I want to get a copy, of course, with your consent, to get a copy of your entire application so that we can review, what the problem is. And if we're able to address the concerns, because normally within the officer's notes, as you probably experienced, these refusal letter don't say anything. They are basically templates. But when we get the actual notes, visa officers are obligated to leave notes about the rationale that led to the decision, because we can take them to court. So we actually know a bit more why you were refused, and then we look at whether there's a possibility to address those concerns or not.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really helpful in that kind of case. So one more question here from Julia. So she's living here right now on an exchange year and going back to finish high school in Italy at the end of the year. So would the period living here still count, or would she be paying university tuition as a citizen or international student? And I can answer that. So you would still pay university tuition as an international student, regardless of graduating from high school here in Canada or in Ontario. When you apply to university, you'll still be considered an international student for fee paying and application processes.
Sorry if you hear my kids in the back. That is the joy of kids.
Well, it's officially the dinner hour, right? So they're probably getting excited for dinner. And
that's right. Now, especially that it's so dark now early that, they feel it's later. But I got to say, you guys were a great, great, great crowd because, in my previous experiences, people were not asking many questions, but you guys clearly have an interest towards that. And that's fantastic. I'm really appreciative to see that, you guys are interested about, that topic. And I encourage you also, I can't answer anything specific really on a webinar like that. If you guys have some concerns or specific questions, just reach me on the internet by email, and that way I can further dig into your case.
Great. Yeah, and we'll follow up by email with a copy of this presentation to all those who registered, and make sure we note the ImmiSite website and the email address to connect with Marc-André as well, because we really appreciate all your insight and expertise here today, Marc-André, and we know you do a great job supporting students and families as they consider these long-term immigration, and it's really exciting to see that the wealth of knowledge being downloaded into this now technological solution. So I know that's going to be really valuable for students, and something that I think everybody on the call should really kind of keep close by, because you will have iterations of your study permit and future immigration that you'll need help with, and ImmiSite and the team that Marc-André and the technology that he's put together is extremely helpful for those and considering this information, and it's a really affordable way to do it as well. So again, thanks for everything.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for the invitation. And I really want to stress, guys, that you don't need to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to lawyers or consultants. That sometimes I feel people are overpaying for these kinds of services. The government works really hard to have the information on their website for free. It's just sometimes the semantic is not necessarily clear, but you can always reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to explain what they mean.
Fantastic. Great. So thanks everybody again for attending today. We'll welcome you back again next Wednesday, 4 p.m. for our next OASDI webinar. And again, to join that, just go over to oasdi.ca/webinars and you can register there. So thanks again, Marc-André. Thanks everybody for attending, and have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.